My name is Madison Shockley. I'm the pastor of the Pilgrim United Church of Christ in Carlsbad, California, and an active member of the San Diego Interfaith Ministerial Association. It's my privilege tonight to introduce our concluding speaker. Our concluding speaker comes to us at a time when we need to hear his unique message. We all have witnessed in recent weeks the tragic shootings in Tucson, Arizona, and it's caused us to wonder yet again why we are the most violent society among the industrialized and the wealthiest nations in the world, why we continue to resort to gun violence to solve our disputes. He speaks from a place that most of us cannot. He speaks from personal experience. Azim Khamisa is the CEO and founder of the Tariq Khamisa Foundation, a foundation named after his own son, who was shot dead at the age of 20. He is the founder and national director of the Constant and Never-Ending Improvement Program that operates nationally here to give hope and vision for a new and peaceful life to young people who are too often caught up in the web of violence in our society. Won't you welcome now Azim Khamisa.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Reverend Madison. Good evening, greetings, namaste. What an evening, huh? What an evening. A lot of pain, a lot of inspiration, a lot of great music. So let's give love to all of our musicians, our speakers, inspiration. And I also want to acknowledge my good friend Christian Sorensen and Joanne Wolf, who was responsible for the evening. It's a very exciting time to celebrate the season for peace and nonviolence. It's framed by Gandhi's assassination, as you all know, January 30th, and MLK's assassination, April 4th, 64 days. Although it ought to be 365 days, right? But it is a special time for all of us to commit to practice the principles of nonviolence and also to become peacemakers and peace builders. And I've been sitting here listening to some of the testimony this evening, and some of it has been very heartbreaking. But sometimes stories that come from tragedy and torture and violence don't necessarily have to end up that way. That's also very true about my story. I've been an avid writer since this tragedy hit me, almost right on 16-year anniversary was the 21st of January, a few days ago. And I've authored 4 books. I keep an active journal. And I remember soon after Tariq passed away, I made this an entry in my journal. And this will resonate with you from some of the testimonies we've heard this evening. And it goes like this: there's nothing quite so painful as a broken heart. There's nothing quite so painful as a broken heart. But a broken heart is an open heart. If one can learn to live with an open heart, gentle transformations begin to happen. I remember I gave a talk at a spiritual center in Michigan, similar to this one. And there was a lot of people that were specially invited that had lost children. And I started with this quote. And at the end of my address, a gentleman came up to me and said to me, I was very moved with your opening quote. It reminded me about a quote by Rumi. I know many of you know who Rumi is. And since you are also a Sufi like Rumi, I'm sure you know this quote. And I said to him, I love Rumi, and yes, I am a Sufi, but Rumi was very prolific. He wrote 138,000 quotes. While I remember many, I don't remember all of them. So please share with me what quote did Rumi write. And he said, what Rumi wrote is, God will break your heart over and over and over and over and over and over again until it stays open. Yeah, that's what I said. And as Reverend Madison said, it's been heartbreaking to read about these murders in Tucson. And maybe this violence continues because not enough of us have open hearts. So one of my goals here today, and one of the goals of the season for peace and nonviolence, is to open your hearts. Why? Because an open heart receives and transmits love more easily. I think in the world we live in, sometimes we are very, very quick to close our hearts. A lot of judgment. How people look, how they say, how they dress, what country they come from, what religion they are, on and on. I think if we can keep an open heart, we would not do that. Now, needless to say that my heart was open, blown open. Tariq was my only son. I have a beautiful daughter. But he was my only son, and he was a great kid. He's very charismatic, very good writer, great photographer, lots of friends, very generous, great sense of humor, a joy to be around. And he was a student at San Diego State University, and he worked on Fridays and Saturdays as a pizza delivery man to make some extra cash for college. And this was the last delivery. He worked for a local restaurant not far from where he went to school, a restaurant called Damilis. Maybe some of you know this restaurant. And the older came in with an address on North Park, a middle-class area where the restaurant routinely delivered pizza. So they didn't think of anything. It was his turn. He jumped in the car and went to the address of the apartment building, knocked on several doors to see who'd ordered the pizzas, and nobody had. So he came back to his car, put the pizzas in the trunk, climbed into the driver's seat, and as he was preparing to drive to back out of the driveway of the apartment building, he was accosted by 4 youth gang members. 3 of them were 14-year-old, and the leader of the gang was an 18-year-old who handed a 9mm handgun to the 14-year-old. And as my son is trying to leave the scene of the crime, the gang leader gave the order, "Bust him bones." And the young man fired 1 round, which came in through the open driver's side window. It entered my son's body right here under the left shoulder blade, traveled across the upper part of his chest, and the bullet actually exited under the right armpit. And as the coroner explained to me a little later, he says the bullet followed a perfect path. A perfect path, I queried. I thought there was an interesting choice of words. And he said to me, "I don't mean to be insensitive, Mr. Camisa. We do not see a path like this very often. What I really meant by that is it destroyed all the vital organs, and Tariq died drowning in his own blood. A couple of minutes later, over a lousy pizza at the age of 20. The sudden, senseless death of an innocent, unarmed human being. The overwhelming grief of a family. The total confusion as you try to absorb a new, hideous reality. And although this was 16 years ago, those early days are etched deeply on my heart and my mind and my soul. And I went through all the emotions you would expect a parent to go through. So I was just maintained that parents were not engineered to withstand the loss of a child. It felt very unnatural for me to bury Tariq. Typically, your children bury you, not the other way around. Despair, grief. I remember at one point I was suicidal.